People normalize isolation and normalize only talking, and we're disconnected from our body. Therapy is not enough to meet people in the depth of their needs. The most essential piece is to be with yourself and meet yourself in your own grief, building capacity. There is always village. It's not an isolated thing. What a relief in our body, mind, and spirit when we can be that honest. I am rocked to my core. What if we do tend to it? How life-changing and life-giving it is. Why is grief at the center of my work, and what brought me here? Grief is at the center of my work because it's at the center of life and humanity. Personal grief and collective grief is within all of us, everyone that you walk past every day. And I care so much about the depths of our humanity and tending to the places where there's gaps in our care and our Western allopathic model, to this revolution of love, this dedication I have to what I believe is a decolonizing of our relationship to grief, and how life-changing it is and how necessary to go beyond what Rumi calls, the famous mystical poet Rumi, the open secret. Like, it's really no secret that we all walk with grief, but we're pretending like it's not there. So what if we do tend to it? How life-changing and life-giving it is, and how we can dissolve isolation, from each other in grief. And what brought me to this work is a combination of so many things. My own personal grief, my own dances with cancer. I'm on fire for filling the gaps in care in our Western allopathic model that simply is not enough to meet people in the depth of their needs. Well, if you look, all around you, we have, systems of care that bring some good things, and then there's a lot of harm that's caused by a lot of systems around us. And so a big part of my work is divesting, encouraging people to divest from linear timelines and divest from the constructs and the systems that ripple out a lot of harm in the end to folks. I think one of the examples of sometimes harm that's caused in our system is again, I feel like it's a colonized idea of only talk therapy is the way through grief. And when we look to cultures all around the world that have a deep and vibrant and healthy relationship to grief and community, there is always village. There is always village holding. There is always emphatic and somatic meaning body rituals, movement practices, wailing, dancing, crying. There is always village that holds you in the depths of grief. And it's not an isolated thing where we are only talking. There has to be physical, somatic elements with grief and being held by others and movement. So where folks are harmed is feeling like they just go to therapy and it's this one-on-one and it's only talk and we're in our heads and we're disconnected from our body energy field and how to truly be supported. So people normalize isolation and normalize a verbal one side of the brain metabolizing when we need tools to meet the moment. We need somatic tools. We need village tools. We need holding relational tools. So juicy. What is grief? Grief is our human experience of love and loss. And I feel like there's not just one answer ever to this, but grief is our human experience and emotion of feeling deeply with loss. And we can feel it deeply in personal losses and collective impact. It is part of the human experience, and yet we live in this grief-phobic culture, and it is pushed to the sidelines and pushed away, and folks are terrified to go there to feel, and yet when we can befriend our grief, our lives can open up, and we can feel that shared humanity in each other, and there's so many ways to be with grief and to be with it in a way that's like a reverencing grief is so different than just pitying, fixing, saving, which we find so common in our culture. there's such harm with the bypassing of grief and the dismissing and the linear timelines of grief when it is so unchoreographed and feral. And if we can go in with reverence for ourselves and each other regarding grief and this shared humanity that we all have experienced this and will continue to, personally and collectively, there can be a curiosity and there can be such a respect and a deepening of intimacy within ourselves and each other to reverence grief. If someone shares their grief with you, to, wow, like what a gift. What a gift that they're sharing that with me. What an honor, what a privilege to deepen our intimacy of knowing each other. And then if we shift that within ourselves, like life-changing, right? To not think, I'm so fucked up, I'm so broken, I'm so human. And what are ways I can be more nurtured and held in this instead of pathologizing or shaming ourselves. So our shared human experience, when we love, we grieve. And that is that deep soul contract, as many grief, teachers and mentors have talked about. So for me personally, there's been a combination of, from a very young age, being such an empathic child and feeling so deeply that I knew from under the age of 10 that I wanted to serve, that I could feel, and again, people and animals, experience their pain, and I wanted to help and support. And then when I became a postpartum doula and birth doula in my late teens, even as a birth doula, I was witnessing so much grief. And in my first 10 births, I witnessed stillbirths. And so the path of full spectrum was just like right there for me to say yes or no to, but I went towards it. So those deeply impactful journeys with families and babies, and my own my own navigations, my own journeys with having cancer at a young age and being told that likely it was terminal. So I had weeks to face my life and death, thinking that maybe I would only have a few months. And years later, I'm still here. So obviously that shifted. Yeah, the grief is not ever just these bigger events of literal life and death. What I love to bring light to and respect to and space to is all of the ambiguous grief that, like, I never was told, say, as a young person who was in the closet, like, that my lack of safety all those years to not be myself, all of that grief to not fully feel safe enough to be myself, was a real grief, and still is to this day, that I mourn and grieve that I couldn't be safe enough for many, many years and feel that. So I really, really respect and want to know folks' stories, and share my own of what is, the big events, and also all of those other tendrils of that tapestry of ambiguous grief, the grief that's never mentioned in society, that matters. My personal experience with my cancer journey, and at one point waiting for results, but being told quite frivolously by people in the system that likely the cancer had spread, that I wouldn't have long to live to face my life and face death, was undeniably excavating and humbling. And thankfully, at that time, I was doing a lot of shamanic practices, which is earth-based rituals and practices where we're already practicing meeting ourselves in death. But of course, practicing that, not having death as a close inevitable, is a different thing than being much closer. And I think I forgave myself for a lot of pieces that were kind of in the background and resisting that forgiveness. I freed myself in forgiving others, not in a typical way, just like freeing myself at the forefront. And I kept moving. I found a way to come out of collapse and paralyzed feeling, and in dance and in movement, somehow kept creating within that. And I mean, I had already been walking the path of a death doula for many years. And so every experience with people with grief, death, and birth was constantly informing how I want to live daily, like, wake up, live differently. Like, this is the most clarifying work in the world. And yeah, the deeper clarity, that came with being that close was undeniable and gnarly and, terrifying and beautiful all at once. The end of life, specifically like anticipated end of life work, because there is a spectrum. I also serve a lot of sudden deaths, which can be also deeply clarifying for everyone around the loved one. An anticipated end of life, there's such truth, and I love the work for that. And the truth is sometimes the worst and the best can come out of a person and their experience. And often there's deep regret around not loving and being authentic, like that authenticity piece, authentic to themselves, whether that was like, I did actually really want to express myself in this way, or experience this, or love in this way, or forgive in this way. So this authenticity piece, I find, is a recurring theme, even if it's maybe not said in that way for those who are dying. Being authentic to who the fuck we are, beyond societal constructs, expectations, roles, who we are and how we want to live, love, and yes, express and die. And so there's, the regret on one side for those who haven't lived that authenticity, and then the joy or bliss or ecstasy for those who have been able to live that full authenticity. Beautiful personal stories of people's, dying and passing. There's so many, of course, that come to mind, and the sovereignty and agency that can be experienced and felt. Like that is some of my favorite, if you will, ways that I get the privilege and honor to witness and support. So as far as death doulas go, there can be a wide range in how a death doula supports. There can be very logistical support and these step-by-step, this is how we do this, and take care of those essential pieces. And some death doulas are there very, spiritually, energetically, physically too, ritually. There's such a wide range of how death doulas can serve. So for anyone who is feeling like, well, this could be in my, whether it's calling or it's a familial piece of I'm going to be supporting someone who's dying, like there's so many ways. If the logistics part is not what you're drawn to, maybe there's other aspects. And how this translates is beautiful, like layers and layers of support. So to come to a personal story, I work a lot as a queer person myself in the queer and trans community. And we have very specific groups for queer and trans dying, for queer and trans grief. And I think the specificity, deepening into that with all groups and all people is so beautiful, because our needs are different. And in this one case, there was some blood-related family members that didn't respect this beautiful trans person and their journey and their name, and were trying to take control of the situation and using the dead name and many other aspects. And the soul family, I was able to support and see this happening and step in as someone who understands that a lot of us in the queer and trans community, it's not blood-related family always. That is the family, it's soul family. It's those who we've gathered around us that support us. And so I invited them to step in more and more and bridge this communication, and then this agency and sovereignty of what this beautiful trans person wanted for their death and dying, for their funeral, for every aspect of that, so they could be celebrated in their authenticity. And the soul family did step in, and it wasn't easy and it wasn't pretty in moments, but it was fucking powerful. So how do we communicate with the dying? There couldn't possibly be one answer. Right? With so many different dying scenarios and relationships and dynamics in those relationships, we can be there with presence. And a lot of the time, again, we're all so deeply informed by a culture that is, again, grief-phobic, anger-phobic, emotion-phobic. So a lot of us are terrified of deep emotions and spaces of deep truth. So my encouragement would be to sit with yourself for moments before sitting with a dying one. however you're related, and hold your own heart. Like literally just rest your hands there and find your breath and let some emotions flow through you and find the ground and try to find that, if you can, just for a moment before going in with that person dying, because it just depends on what the relationship is, what the dynamic is, so many aspects. If there is space for love to flow, then being in pure presence and trusting in nonverbal moments, that's some of the most, I think, profound experiences I've had and witnessed is a lot of nonverbal moments of tenderness and respect, because it's a big mystery, the way that the end of life unfolds, and sometimes it's soft and gentle, and sometimes it's fucking not, and gnarly and messy and challenging. So to source from love for yourself and to source from love regarding that moment, and that might be holding a boundary and holding love at the same time. But this is where a doula and a support person can really just help us keep resourcing within ourselves, and then that moment. But if there is space for love, let there be space. How do we grow capacity to be with the grieving? The most essential piece is to be with yourself and meet yourself in your own grief. And somehow, some way, there's so many paths, and this is a large part of my work, is supporting folks building capacity to be with grief. And that initial piece of that reverence, switching from the fear and the phobia of grief to this like deep reverence within ourselves, towards ourselves. And yes, tools to meet the moment when we haven't largely been given shared tools. So that capacity for grief, that capacity to be with the faces of grief, right? It's not just this one-dimensional thing. It is the face of anger. How the heck do we do that? How can we build capacity to be with anger and learn how, and this is my big passion with this work, metabolize anger. And there's ways, many ways. How do we meet that face of grief with deep denial, sorrow? And as I have met these places within myself, the rage, and been with the rage and transmuted the rage and danced with it and ceremony and screamed in the bathwater, screamed underwater in the ocean, and then softened and held. Like, how do we do this? And that is the only way that we can truly be with others' grief, because we have cultivated that deep respect within ourselves and found tools to meet those moments, and then shift into this deep respect of someone else's love, grief, anger, sadness, and denial. Like, even that aspect is when I can dance with and respect myself in times when I've been in deep denial of grief and loss, and learn to value and respect that as, wow, that is a deep wisdom actually within me of this is too much, and I did not yet. And so there's this titration that can naturally happen within folks, that sometimes I'm like, okay, beautiful, that denial is okay. Sometimes it's keeping someone safer in an experience until they're more ready. And at some point, to thaw out from the anger, grief, rage, and meet those metabolizing tools, so I can then meet others with that respect and reverence. I'm not trying to rush anyone out of it. Like, we're a culture of urgency and rush, and like, you cannot do that with grief. It requires slow, deep respect. And so even my nonverbal presence is proof. If I show up to a space and it's end of life and there's different family members and all these emotions, like, if I can hold that within myself, like, of course, this can be a lot of emotions, and they're working through it, like, because I've held that within myself. That is felt in the space. It is felt with the dying person. It is felt with everyone around. And it doesn't mean we're like perfectly polished and masterful at anything. We're just finding ways to hold space for ourselves and each other to actually feel these things, and that's how they will actually wash through in being witnessed. I'm human. And over the years, so as a doula, feeling emotions, I think, is is so, essential. And of course, I'm not going to get lost in something because I'm there holding space. But this is like some of the deepest, rawest human experiences of end of life and grief. And if I'm there with a softness or a teariness in my eyes or a softness in my heart and being, can I allow that to be there and also hold that space and be tracking what's happening around me? I feel like that's an essential piece of the humanness, and tenderness. That's the tenderness is the resistance. That's how we're changing grief culture. It's not just this sterilized space. It's deeply felt and soulful and penetrating. So yes, on the subject of the range of doulas, and how doulas can support. So there's anticipated end of life, and then there's doulas who support, like myself, a whole wide range, which also includes unexpected deaths. So whether that's suicide, someone who chose to end their own life, stillbirths, accidents, murders. This is a whole other aspect of death doula work that is niche and deeply needs support. And ways that I work, I guess I can only speak how I work in this realm, is meeting what is, and it might be one-to-one or it might be a group, and to name what is, and like really divesting from any languaging that, like at stillbirth, it's not a sleeping baby. It's a baby who died in utero, who is dead. Like, to divest from that language and honor the truth is huge. And then meet the moment. So if it's that person is in just deep, deep shock, it may be that I'm doing a lot of beautiful practices within my bodywork therapy practice. I'm also a bodywork therapist in conjunction with being a doula. And it might be wrapping and swaddling this person and bringing that containment to being blown open by that shock. And lots of containment practices that we would do with a baby, with rhythmic rocking, with guided breath, and with the space to fully feel if it's just still in that frozenness the whole time, or some primal screams and release comes out, that there is space for all of it. And other times it's a readiness within the shock and a need to express, so we don't just stay frozen in that shock. So I might come in with my instruments and drumming, or music that has powerful drumming, and guide through a movement practice to, again, primally release. This is primal material with shock. So oftentimes it's either the shock and needing to be held, or the combination of wild primal release that is not just release. There's a lot of containment and nurturing after that can regulate or just integrate. That's soft. So there's this beautiful saying, we don't come out of shock with talk. And that is so true. And there is so many beautiful bodies of work. The body remembers, and so many bodies of work that are speaking to this, that our stories are in our bodies. Grief is in our body. Grief is in our nervous system. And we're so masterful at intellectualizing grief. And it is not this intellectual thing. It is this primal journey for our nervous system. And through our lungs, we can get frozen, through our brain, through our vagus nerve. So how do we do this? And what I've witnessed again as a bodywork therapist is someone will just, okay, like we're doing this kind of session and it's something that's maybe lighter. And then all of a sudden there's some movement in the heart center, any area of the body where a story has been frozen. We call it frozen prana in yoga, stuck. And then all of a sudden this huge wave of emotion comes through. And in breathwork practices too, this comes through. And it's so, a precious opportunity to, thaw out, from that frozenness of shock. And again, I feel like shock denial can protect us for a while. It can be an essential piece of surviving something really brutal and shocking. And there comes a point where, in one of the many ways, we can slowly thaw out. And that means bringing our vagus nerve back online by the way we're breathing and emoting. I do lots of vocal release with folks, and it is life-changing. Shocking sometimes, the sounds that might come through, but then liberating on so many levels. We can unlock this frozen state of our brain, our vagus nerve. We can regenerate cellularly and like actually metabolize in our bodies these emotions. And yeah, how do we do that, right? That's not a common piece that we're talking about. How do we metabolize grief in our bodies? Not just talk therapy. It's not enough. It never has been. Beautiful ways for metabolizing grief in the body. There's so many ways. Yes, physically in our body with movements, vocally with sound, and energetically too. And I can offer a few here. And of course, there's so many more. So sometimes in that spirit of agency, consent, and sovereignty, we might try a few physical practices, and then someone might say, that one really resonates. And I love that, right? To be in co-creation together, to liberate our instincts is also so supportive of our grief journey, to be like, there's not just one answer to anything. So let's try. One of the practices is simply, but not simply. We're like, oh, we breathe every day. Yes, but to bring our hands to our low belly between our pubic bone and belly button, and to just try to feel, and just being really gentle because it might be really locked up, to feel some movement there, just feel some movement of belly full, belly empty. And just that little bit of pumping is going to start to bring our vagus nerve back online. The vagus nerve is what goes offline with shock, trauma, grief sometimes. And so to bring that online, that pumping, it's going to start to bring this whole vagus nerve that innervates the whole center line of our body online. So it's going to rebound this message of safety, more safety, up to our heart, up to our brain, that belly breathing. And it seems so simple, but to stay with it and allow emotions to wash through if they come through, to practice riding those waves. We're not going to cry forever. We're going to cry for a long time sometimes. And that crying is going to reset our nervous system. And that feeling something is a way to harvest from it. If I feel sadness and I push it down, it's suppressing my immune system and it is locked somewhere in my body. And if some part of me is muted, all other parts get muted. So at some point, without shaming ourselves for the frozen blocks, we can just slowly thaw out and strengthen our immune system as we do and bring ourselves back online. So that's one simple practice. And there's deepening with breath work. If folks are ever interested, there's, ceremonies, classes with groups and one-to-one to do different variations. Some are open mouth. So there's kind of that sound of when we feel joy, we feel deeply, and when something shocking happens, we're kind of activating that response and the capacity to also regenerate and clear. One of the other practices is just, always with any of these, is to come back to titration and come back to containment and soothing. So if I do some of the breath work, especially open mouth, I'm always going to come back and hum. I'm going to hum deeply, and I'm going to do that for a few minutes and notice where I feel the vibration in my body. So I'm returning back to my body. If I've been really disconnected and just up here, where am I tracking that vibration? The humming is bringing your parasympathetic nervous system online, and that's the healing state of your nervous system. So always a combo of something moving or cathartic, and then the rest and digest. Another really simple one, and I love talking to folks about, like, you're in your day, you're going to feel things. It might be like, I'm fine, and I'm at the grocery store and I'm seeing a can of Roma tomatoes and I'm like, holy fuck, I'm a mess because think of my mother and her cooking and our complex relationship and her death. And how can we just access little things and little moments that can support us so deeply? So for folks who are intimidated by this, to know, like, it could just be like a minute or 3 minutes a day that I'm doing this and I'm starting to feel more resourced, or I have something to do when I don't know what to do. Now, this next one is from Kundalini Yoga, and it's this squeezing of our thumbs, and you squeeze the whole body. You might shake, and then you soften. And you go between the two. I'm going to do one more, a little more emotive. And so for that one, at the end, again, humming, resting, digesting. And I would time myself, or tell clients to time yourself for 3 minutes doing that flow, the squeeze, the release, the squeeze and the release. It's going to all the tight corners, flushing toxins through the body and coming back to that soft place. It's that wringing out, almost like we're wringing out a heavy, heavy wet towel. And it's so fucking work sometimes, but it's going to be lighter at the end. We get to wring out the pain and then come back to some softening. So that's super beautiful. And then the toning, vocal work is huge. We're really trained. This is Clarissa Pinkola Estes, who wrote Women Who Run with the Wolves, who has prolific work on many levels and books. And she always reminds us, like, we're trained to remain contained. And so if we are, again, constantly suppressing and containing, that is, suppressing so many systems of our body and our energy field and our joy and all of it. So the expression with sound, could be another movement where we hud and we do this sound low as we can. And as we're doing the sound and the movement, the belly is doing that pumping that we talked about before. The sound is deep and low, oftentimes fear and anxiety are high pitch. And so we're bringing that sound low, and that's where a lot of things have been stuffed down. So there can be like some ferocity and expression that's so essential, for us digesting these bigger emotions. And then, of course, softening at the end. So it could be hud, 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 hud. And it might turn into crying or screaming, but you come back to the hud, you time it for a few minutes. It's a powerful movement, powerful sound. It's deep and loud. And then there's a softening and a holding at the end to just return to sigh, to cry, to hum. And it may be crying and humming and continuing that for a few minutes until it feels like some softness. And if you've done that dance, the power, then the softness, and you do the softness and you're checking in, you're like, oh no, there's more. Okay, time another 3 minutes and go. Feel and then rest and then check in. And so these are seemingly really simple things, but super, super potent. And that expression is everything, right? These emotions need motion. And so sometimes it's like I'm at the gym and I'm lifting heavy weights and I'm imagining working through some rage. I mean, I might do it because I'm just that type of person in this time of my life. But I might imagine as I'm lifting the weight or pulling the thing like some Kali Ma, which is a goddess in Hindu mythology who's fierce and expressive. And sometimes doing that in my own space or the screaming underwater, like expression to support us out of the frozenness and to be real and honest and to learn to, respect ourselves in that capacity to express and feel. That sometimes is life-saving, I would say, for people. So I'm Teresa, and lately I've been taking my mom's last name, Teresa Renzetti. Many people in this community know me as Teresa Campbell. And I am a queer, full-spectrum doula, living, working, loving, and losing on the unceded ancestral lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples, who I honor and revere and hold reverence for the grief of these precious peoples. I'm here as I wear a few hats. I'm a passionate Aries. So as a full spectrum doula, that means I'm working with folks, fertility through birth and then end of life and sudden deaths. I'm a grief walker and a somatic grief walker. So that means a big passion of mine is working with folks, whether one-on-one, combining my bodywork therapy with grief support, or groups. And I even do a spectrum of celebrancy work. So not only officiating weddings, but also funerals, end of life ceremonies, living funerals. And it's hard for me as a passionate being of holding space for transitions and thresholds to name just one thing. But I love seeing folks finding their truth, authenticity, their power, divesting from, the systems and constructs of harm around us and really claiming how we want to, approach death and dying and grief and how we're questioning, like there has to be more, there has to be more ways to live and love and grieve and be supported. So one aspect of my work that I want to name that I feel like isn't named often is the realm of possibilities that we maybe are just struck by a sudden death and the grief of it all, and we're just going day to day and feeling so much pain and suffering and alone. So I want to really dissolve isolation, bring people back to community and village at every chance. And that realm of possibilities means, for example, like you can be in your full truth with me. So if there's a complex death, someone you love is dying, but also it's a complex relationship, and maybe that person caused you a lot of harm, that you deserve and need to be held in the specificity of that. And that there has been folks and sexual abuse survivors that I've worked with someone who abused them died years ago, and they had to really dismiss and silence their experience of being at the funeral when everyone's celebrating that person, and they're having a very different experience. So that realm of possibility piece is we can redo a funeral. And whether that's your loved one died during the pandemic and you were all separated and that felt so harming and horrific, and how we can, even if it's years later, of course, we can redo that funeral for that loved one. Or with that survivor, we can redo that funeral and support you meeting your rage and reclaim in the ways you deserve and feel seen. So I'd say, I'm pretty niche-y in my death doula support, end of life, sudden death, and all the realms of grief from 25 years ago, from yesterday. Like, what are the possibilities and the ways that you can be met, you can be seen, you can be held, you can be more resourced in this life. Doula to me, the word doula is a word that just is like this most ferocious love and compassion. This one who is a tender and who holds space with pure presence. And that means, all the expressions of love. And sometimes the love is that obvious expression of love that doulas bring. And sometimes that love is the ferocious part of clear boundaries that are needed with different family members or people of the system. And so, the doula is just a loving being who gets to redefine what love means in thresholds and transitions, and who has walked and continues to walk with their own grief and their own many deaths within self and beginnings and births, who has and continues to walk with those aspects of themselves so they can bring a fuller humanity to what they do.